Thank you very much. I want to thank Rabbi Strauchler for organizing the convention. And Joel, thank you for the introduction. Story is told of Alfred Nobel, the noted chemist, that on the passing of his brother Ludwig, he woke up that morning. And when he read the obituary, unfortunately, the obituary was not about his brother. It was about him in the French newspaper. And it said, "Here dies the merchant of death." And he realized at that moment that although he was a scientist, he would be remembered as the purveyor of dynamite, the curator of death. He was so shocked by that moment that he did soul searching. Is this the way that he was going to leave a mark on the world? And at that moment, he made a commitment to utilize and harness his wealth for the Nobel Prize, which we are the beneficiaries today. I'm in the midst right now of writing a book, the premise which is as follows. Imagine yourself leaving a funeral, and as you walk out of the funeral, you have a moment where you say to yourself, I hope they speak about me the way they spoke about that person. Regardless of your faith, you feel you want to do more with life. By a show of hands, how many of you felt that way? A little more. You're feeling that what's really important in life. And for about 15, 30 minutes, you're focused on leading a life that's a little more caring, that's a little more focused. And generally what happens is, in a matter of a half hour, an hour, we go back to business as usual. We lose sight of what we've truly remembered. The book that I'm writing is called, What Will They Say About You When You're Gone? You begin the book by writing your own obituary. And then I take you on a journey, 7 principles for reverse engineering your life, so you lead the life now for how you want to be remembered. Each and every one of us has experienced moments when we've had a brush with our mortality, when we feel the fragility of life. In the process of writing the book, I had an interview with the former mayor of New York, Mayor Rudy Giuliani, and he shared with me the feeling that the country had on September 12th. We all felt that we were able on that day to transcend our partisan differences. We hugged our family a little bit tighter. But he said to me, it's so hard to replicate that sense of feeling of September 12th, of appreciating every moment. And on a deeply personal level, I think we all feel this at different moments. Just last spring, I gained a renewed appreciation of my favorite blessing. My favorite blessing is the one that Jews say after you go to the bathroom. You say a blessing of Asher Yatzar. We say, thank God, what is open, and what is closed is closed. And I had a kidney stone. One small speck created havoc in the way that I was functioning. And certainly after that bracha and after I was relieved of that kidney stone, I felt a sense of godliness and awareness. But how do I maintain that? I've always lived my life with a sense of urgency. Credit my father, he should live and be well. My mother, a blessed memory. Growing up in Atlanta, I was a big fan of the Atlanta Braves, of the Falcons, the Hawks. But on the poster in my bedroom in Atlanta, there was not a picture of a sports hero. There was a picture of a saying from Ethics of Our Fathers. Im lo achshav eimatai. If not now, when? And this hit me even more as I entered into my 40s. My mother, blessed memory, died of a brain aneurysm when she was 44 years old. I'm the oldest of 6 children. She left me, she left my father. And when I was in my early 20s, I knew that that was young. But then when I entered my 40s, I really began to think about, at the prime of her life, we never know when is our last day. And I began to think deeply about how do we lead lives that are filled with impact, in which we enrich our relationships, if we live with a heightened sense of awareness to ensure that we lead lives for how we want to be remembered. I'd like to share with you this evening one of these 7 principles. It's a principle entitled Discover Your Elijah Moment. Discovering your Elijah moment in yourself and seeing the Elijah in others. Well, who was Elijah? I know just now he loved humor. But Elijah was a person who was called by God at a time when the Jewish people were enmeshed in idolatry. And God called Elijah to come to persuade the Jewish people back, to have rachmanut, to have mercy on them. But Elijah was a zealot. He didn't have faith in the Jewish people. And God got angry at him. And God said, you need to have more faith in the Jewish people. And lo and behold, Jewish tradition tells us that as a result of Elijah's hesitancy to fight, support, to inspire the Jewish people, he comes back in Jewish history at moments to say, I believe in you. I'm here for you. I'm going to move you along at a time when you might feel a sense of crisis. Elijah shows up at the Passover Seder to affirm Jewish identity. Elijah shows up at a circumcision as well. What does it mean to discover an Elijah moment? The best way to characterize this is from a famous story of the great Hasidic master, the Baal Shem Tov. The Baal Shem Tov was once approached by one of his disciples who said, I've achieved a lot. It's time for me now to merit to see Elijah. Rabbi, can you help me find Elijah? So the Baal Shem Tov said to him, here's what you need to do. If you take food for Shabbat and visit this widow in the forest, and you spend Shabbat with her, I can promise you that you'll see Elijah the prophet. So the disciple follows the words of the Baal Shem Tov to a T, spends Shabbat in the house with this widow and the children. Friday night, Elijah's not there. Saturday, Shabbat morning, Elijah's not there. Comes the end of Shabbat, Elijah's still not there. And the disciple is quite disappointed. He goes back to the Baal Shem Tov and says, you told me I would see Elijah the prophet. Well, the Baal Shem Tov says, I want you to do it one more week. So he says, the rabbi tells me to do it, I'm going to go. So he packs up his bags, he takes his food. It's getting close to Shabbat on Friday afternoon. And as he's approaching the house, he hears cries in the home of the widow. And there's a child that is crying to the mother. It said, Mama, how are we going to have food for Shabbat this week? We have no food. And the mother turns to the child and says, just like Elijah came last week, Elijah will definitely come again. In that one moment, this individual realized that he was the Elijah that the world was waiting for. What does it mean to be an Elijah? To be an Elijah means that we understand that we are God's agents, that through us we can be partners in bringing acts of kindness to the world. Discovering our Elijah moment means that we are leading lives of legacy. I like to call this, as a rabbi, a phenomenon that I see many times in funerals. I call it the standing room only phenomenon. There's sometimes people that will come to a funeral that will stand by the side. The deceased probably doesn't even remember who they are if they could answer. The family has no idea who they are. But they're only there because of one moment in time when the individual who is deceased maybe took 5 minutes to help this individual when two souls connected, and that fleeting moment turned into an enduring and eternal moment that transformed that person's life. We've all felt it in our lives, and we've all understood that it's possible to become that Elijah. I want to share 2 stories with you about discovering your Elijah moment, and then conclude by talking about how we can find the Elijah in others. One story is from a visit that I had with some friends up in West Hartford last summer, and the other was from 9/11 this past year. I was teaching a class in West Hartford to some friends, and I gave them the following question. It was a group of women. I said, describe for me a peak moment in your life, a moment when you really felt touched by the hand of God. So one woman volunteered. She said, it wasn't too long ago that I was in a parking lot of the Big Y in West Hartford. And as I was getting out of my car, I saw an elderly man with orthopedic shoes. And he was struggling out of his car. But I noticed that his shoes were untied. And out of the corner of my eye, I saw that he was struggling. I went over to him. I went down and I tied his shoes. And then she began to cry. She said that simple act of tying his shoes was one of the holiest moments of my life. When I felt that I was connecting with this individual. For her, it was her Elijah moment. She asked me why. I said it reminded me of a quote of Mark Twain who said, the 2 most important days of your life are the days that you're born and the day that you understand why. She understood at that moment that she was transcending time to help that other individual. And we all can find our Elijah moments. For me, it happened at a Starbucks in Stamford, Connecticut, this past September 11th. I was in my car listening to CBS 880 radio, and a police officer, a New York City police officer, was being interviewed. And he said, "It's wonderful today. Somebody randomly came up to me and gave me a $20 bill and just gave it to me to say, 'Thank you very much for all that you do for me.'" And I already had my coffee in hand, and I said to myself, "That's really nice. I can leave the parking lot right now, or maybe I can do such an act of kindness for somebody today." So I decided to try the pay it forward Starbucks experiment. How many of you tried that before? It's worth it. You go to the person at the cashier and you say, "I'm not only going to pay for my drink, but I'm going to pay for the drink of the person behind me." And it's amazing to see how many people follow suit. So I decided to go back into the Starbucks, and I go over with my coffee to the cashier and I say, "It's 9/11 today. Would you mind paying for the fellow who's standing right there?" So I stepped aside. I wanted to see who was going to be the recipient of this act of kindness. It was a young man with a child. And she says, "He paid for your coffee." And he comes over to me and he says to me, "Why did you do that for me today?" I said, "Well, it's September 11th. I wanted to express a sense of unity. It's an important time." He said, "Well, that really means a lot." And this is taking place in Stamford, Connecticut. I was at ground zero on 9/11. And I said to him, "What were you doing at ground zero on 9/11? He said to me he was a retired New York City police officer. And I realized at that moment that God was helping me fulfill this Elijah moment. I could have gotten back into my car, but I realized maybe there's a reason why I'm here, to be able to be that Elijah for somebody else. But there's a second step to discovering your Elijah moment, and that's not only seeing the Elijah in yourself, but seeing the Elijah in others. It means that Elijah could be the child in the classroom. Elijah could be the maintenance person. Elijah can be one of our congregants, to appreciate the infinite potential in every human being. Elijah is anyone, and Elijah is everyone. And what would happen if we began to see everyone as a potential Elijah? I believe it will be the beginning of the Messianic age. And I want to share one final story with you. Stories about a monastery that was on hard times. They weren't getting many people there, and the father of the monastery went to a rabbi. He thought he'd go to the rabbi for advice and say, "Rabbi, what can I do to help save this monastery?" And the rabbi said, "I'm not really sure what kind of advice I can give you, but I can tell you one thing. One of the people in your monastery is the prophet Elijah." So the father looked and said, "Well, that's kind of cryptic advice, but I'll give it a shot." And he went back to his monastery and he said, "Wait a second. It can't be Father Paul who's Elijah. He's a bit crotchety. It can't be Father Abbott. He's a little too young." But finally, over time, they began to realize that since they didn't know who Elijah was, they began to see everyone in the monastery as a possible Elijah. The spirit of the monastery began to change. The aura began to emanate. And slowly the light began to return to that place. We have the possibility of seeing the Elijah in others. The Elijah in others can be individuals who we oftentimes don't fully appreciate. But to see the infinite capacity in everyone, the infinite possibility for impact. How do we lead lives of legacy? We lead lives of legacy by reverse engineering our lives, by appreciating that every day is a blessing. Every hour and every moment. The Slonim Rebbe quotes the Ari HaKadosh, Rabbi Isaac Luria, that says the most haunting question at the end of our lives is not simply, did we study Torah, were we committed to our faith and committed to family? But were we the best we could be? Did we maximize every moment, every day, and understand the holy mission in which we're on? God willing, together, if we not only see the Elijah in others, but discover our Elijah moments, we can transform our communities. We can transform the world. You get an email, you get a phone call, you meet somebody, it's another soul. It's another encounter. We may be the Elijah that our community and that the world is waiting for. God willing, if we see the Elijah in others and discover our own, we will not only lead lives of greater impact, we will not only enrich our families and lead inspired lives, but we will lead lives for which, God willing, we know we can be remembered.